It was Christmas Eve, and the warm, festive atmosphere at Emma's house could not hide the strange unease she felt when the letter appeared on her doorstep. No return address. Just a neatly folded piece of paper with her name written in old-fashioned ink. She sat down by the fire, wondering who could possibly send her a letter at this hour. The words inside shocked her to the core. Dear Emma, you don't know me, but I know you. The truth about your father is still buried. The case that has haunted your family for years, the murder of David Miller, is far from solved. Your father was one of the suspects, and there is something he has never told you. Look at the evidence, and you will see what he's hiding. Yours sincerely, a friend. Emma's heart raced. She knew her father was a respected man, the mayor of their small town, and she had never heard him mention any unsolved crime, let alone murder. The case mentioned in the letter, the murder of David Miller, a local businessman, was long forgotten in the town's history. It had been unsolved for years, but everyone assumed it was a cold case with no leads. She couldn't believe what she was reading. Why would someone bring it up now? And why mention her father? Was there something her father was hiding? The next day, Emma began her investigation. She visited the local library, scouring old newspaper clippings, trying to find any connection between her father and David Miller's death. She discovered that her father had been questioned by the police at the time, but no evidence had ever tied him to the crime. Emma found herself torn between the love and respect she had for her father and the nagging feeling that there was something more to the story. As she dug deeper, she met Detective Laura Banks, a former investigator on the case who had retired years ago. Laura was hesitant to talk at first, but after some coaxing, she admitted that there were inconsistencies in the original investigation. She told Emma, "There was something off about that night, something your father never mentioned. I could never prove it, but I've always wondered." Laura revealed that a witness had come forward after the case had gone cold, someone who claimed to have seen Emma's father leaving the scene of the crime on the night David Miller was killed. But the witness mysteriously disappeared before they could testify. The more Emma learned, the more questions she had. One evening, as she was going through her father's old belongings, she stumbled upon a locked drawer in his desk. With trembling hands, she unlocked it, finding a stack of old photographs, letters, and a small, dusty box. Inside the box was a key that didn't match anything in the house. Emma was determined to uncover the truth, so she followed the key's trail. It led her to an abandoned cabin outside town, hidden deep in the woods. As she opened the door, her breath caught in her throat. Inside, she found David Miller's body, preserved in a way that suggested someone had been keeping it hidden for years. But the most shocking discovery was the diary next to him, a diary that revealed a web of secrets her father had been part of. The diary contained detailed accounts of her father's involvement in a secret operation involving blackmail and illegal deals with David Miller. But there was one detail that left Emma horrified. The diary suggested that her father was not the only one involved in the murder. There was another person, someone close to her, a family member who had been keeping the secret all along. Emma's world began to crumble as she realized the truth. Her father had been involved in David Miller's death, but it wasn't just his decision. Her uncle, Richard, had been the mastermind behind the murder, manipulating everyone to cover it up. Richard had used her father as a pawn in his twisted game, and Emma's entire family had been living a lie. In a confrontation with her father, Emma finally learned the shocking details. Her father had been forced to help with the murder to protect his family, but he had never meant for things to get so out of control. He had tried to bury the past, to keep his family safe from the truth. But now, it was out. The letter had been a warning to Emma, urging her to uncover the darkness that had been hidden for years. Emma was on the edge. She had uncovered so much already, yet there was still a part of her that couldn't let go. The letter, the diary, the hidden cabin, they were pieces of a puzzle, but there was still one final piece missing. After the discovery of her uncle's involvement in the murder, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was still hidden, something deeper. Her father had confessed everything, but Emma needed to know the full extent of Richard's involvement in why he had orchestrated everything in the first place. There had to be a reason, a motive. She returned to the small town's courthouse, where old files were stored. She hoped she could find something that would make the final pieces of the puzzle click into place. Emma went to the clerk's office and requested the sealed documents related to David Miller's death. With a skeptical glance, the clerk handed her a thick file marked confidential. Inside, Emma found a list of names, including Richard's, and documents detailing financial transactions. There were discrepancies between Richard's business dealings and the payments made to David Miller, payments that were hidden from public records. Emma's heart raced. She had stumbled upon the final clue: blackmail. Richard had been blackmailing David Miller, threatening to expose his illegal business dealings if he didn't comply. Emma's father had been unknowingly caught in the middle. Richard had staged the murder to silence David, but not before he had extracted every last bit of information and money he could. David had been a pawn in Richard's larger game. Emma knew she had to confront Richard. She had everything she needed to expose him, but the fear and anxiety of facing him head-on overwhelmed her. How would she even begin to explain what she knew? How could she confront the man who had been part of her family for so long and whom she had trusted? She arrived at Richard's mansion that evening, her heart pounding in her chest. The grand house looked nothing like the man it housed, full of secrets and lies. As Emma stood on the doorstep, she felt a chill run down her spine. She knocked, the sound echoing in the empty space. Richard answered, his face dropping when he saw Emma. He clearly wasn't expecting her. "Emma, what are you doing here?" Richard's voice was steady, but there was a flicker of nervousness in his eyes. "I know what you did," Emma said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You killed David Miller. You blackmailed him, and you used my father as a pawn in your game." Richard's face went pale. He didn't deny it. Instead, he smiled faintly, a dark, knowing smile. "It's all in the past now, Emma," Richard replied coolly. "There's no point in digging up old wounds. Your father didn't want you to know the truth. He tried to protect you. You ruined everything," Emma said, her voice shaking with emotion. "You ruined my family. And you made us all live in fear for years. What else are you hiding?" Richard sighed and sat down, motioning for Emma to take a seat. "You want the whole story, don't you? It's not as simple as you think." Richard began to explain everything. The blackmail had started years ago, when David Miller had tried to expose Richard's own illegal operations. Richard, desperate to keep his secrets hidden, had used David's weaknesses against him. Over time, the blackmail escalated. But David had grown tired of the manipulation, and in a final attempt to stop Richard, he had tried to break free. Richard couldn't let that happen. So, he planned the murder, framing it as an accidental death. He had counted on the small town's police force to fail in their investigation. After all, he was a well-respected businessman, and the case was quickly dismissed as unsolvable. "Your father was never supposed to be involved," Richard continued. "He didn't know what I was doing. But when I saw that your father had become an obstacle in my plan, I had to involve him to make sure he didn't get suspicious. He was too trusting. I knew he would never question me." Emma felt nauseous as the full weight of Richard's words settled in. Her father had been oblivious to Richard's manipulations, a puppet in his scheme. "Why didn't you just leave it all behind?" Emma asked. "Why did you involve me? Why send me that letter?" Richard looked at her, his eyes cold but calculating. "You're my niece, Emma, and you were always too clever for your own good. I knew you would uncover the truth one day. But you couldn't stop me, Emma. Nobody could." Emma knew what she had to do. She called the police, armed with the evidence she had gathered. Richard, realizing his time was running out, tried to flee, but it was too late. He was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including the murder of David Miller. The truth had finally come to light, and Emma had brought justice to her family. But the toll it took on her was immeasurable. Her father, though guilty of knowing nothing about his brother's true nature, was devastated by the revelations. The bond of trust between father and daughter had been shattered, but they both knew that rebuilding would take time. Emma was left standing in front of her family home, looking at the place she had once considered a sanctuary. Everything had changed. The past could never be erased. But at least now, she knew the truth. It wasn't about vengeance, it was about closure. As Emma walked away from the house, the weight of the past finally seemed to lift, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the truth, once uncovered, would always follow her. The letter from the past had given her answers, but it had also opened a door to a world she could never unsee. The past had its grip on her family, but now, Emma was free to move forward.